Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we are out in Colorado with another Pennsylvania runner, this time a sprinter, someone with a very accomplished career, many All American titles, national championship, and many Hall of Fames. We'll talk about all those accomplishments, but also what it was like from a different angle running in the 70s as a sprinter. Welcome today on the podcast, George Crunkleton. Welcome, George.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
George, let's introduce everybody from the very earliest days of your memories of when you first got into competitive sports or competitive running and how competition was to you back then.
I remember in the fifth grade, we had an all-city championship track meet, but I could not compete because I was playing Little League Baseball in the spring at the same time, and a pitch was coming toward my face, and I put my arm up. The ball hit my elbow and broke my elbow.
Wow.
So at that time, I was in a cast, so I waited the following year to run. It was a 75-yard dash, and I was the city champion. But at a very young age, I knew that I had speed. I grew up in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and right in front of our home, there was a park, a city park. And I had older cousins that at the time were in high school when I was in elementary school. One of my cousins was a cross-country runner, so I would borrow his spikes. I would put them on, and I would run in the grass, and I'd run sprints. I was fascinated by how fast my body could move. And that was at a very young age. I would just go out there with no one prompting me to do it. And I would just run sprints in this park because I was fascinated by the speed that I had at a very young age. And that's how I became first interested in track and field and in competing against other kids, other cities, other towns.
There was no clock on you in the park, right? You were just
No,
running.
there was no clock at all. I just became fascinated in terms of how fast that I could run in those spikes.
Well, that's interesting. That's about yourself and your own performance. What about competition? When did you get into officially competing in track?
It was in junior high school. In junior high school, we had a junior high track team. Back then, it wasn't called middle school, it was called junior high. It was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. As a 7th grader, I was really attracted to the high jump because all my friends were lining up to high jump, right? They were high jump and then the long jump. So I tried those things and I was decent, but then I was one of the better guys in the sprints at that time. So before I became a quarter miler, my event was a 200-yard dash.
How did you have relationships and impact of early coaches? Did you have good coaching then? Did you have equipment?
Way back when, in 9th grade, there was a guy that would have like basketball clubs. He had a track club. We went up to Oil City, Pennsylvania to run in a junior Olympic meet. I can't remember the other place we went to, but at that time, it was a straight 220-yard track that I'd never run before. But there, I beat one of my teammates in that 200 that had been beating me. This is a kid that in the 7th grade, he was like the tallest kid in our class, right? So he had long legs. I hadn't developed yet, but I ended up beating him there. I was on a 440 relay team that went to Oil City to run. And that was the first time we had competition. That was the first time that I was blown away by other athletes. I can't even remember what place we got. There were some athletes in my age group that were running some phenomenal times. And really back then I said, why not me? Why not me? What do I have to do to get to that point where I'm one of the best around? And those are the things that motivated me.
What was your high school career in athletics?
My high school career in athletics, I started playing 3 different sports in my sophomore year: football, basketball, and track. At the time, my first love was basketball. Okay. And there's a story to be told about going to Edinboro on a track scholarship, but I walked on in basketball. In football, as a sophomore, I was playing suicide squad against the seniors. As a sophomore, I was 6 foot, 140 pounds. I was going against a guy that was a defensive end because I was a split end. I had to line up like a tight end. We had a guy that was 6'3", 240. He was 100 pounds more than me. After getting my butt kicked several times, I'm like, you know what? I don't think this is for me. I stopped playing football and just played basketball and ran track. In my sophomore year, I led off our 880-yard relay team, and we made it to the WPL championships. But I was growing so fast that I suffered a hairline fracture on my hip toward the end of the season. We won back then, which was called the Midwest Athletic Conference, the MAC, of which Newcastle was in. And that's the high school that I went to. We won that having 3 sophomores and a senior. So in my junior year, I was a relay guy, but running the 200. But I found that the coaches at Newcastle at the time didn't really know much. They decided probably by default to coach. So in high school, I did not have good coaches in track. But I was noticing some of my other teammates, it would take them all day to get to the workout. They'd be stretching the whole time. They'd be goofing off. And in my junior year, toward the end of my junior year, that's when I decided that I'm going to run the 440-yard dash.
Right.
And the first time that I ran it, I think I came second off the school record. So I started running just individual events. I let the relays go and start running. There was a 100-yard dash at 220 and the 440. Going into my senior year, after the basketball season, which I was all section, I had told my dad, I said, I'm going to go and break the school record in the 440-yard dash, and then I'm going to quit because I want to play in some of these postseason basketball tournaments. Okay. And in 1 week, I broke the school record 3 times and was a WPL champion in the 440, but I'd also qualified for the 220, but I wanted to concentrate on the 440. Went to state that year, but after the WPL championships, on the way home, I caught a bad cold. The state was the following week. I didn't get over that cold, and I ran a half a second slower at the state meet. But based on the time that I ran to win the WPL championship, I started getting recruited. And I got recruited by Pitt, West Virginia, Edinboro, Clarion, and there was probably a few other schools in there that I can't recall. So it came down to Edinboro and Pitt. The reason why I decided to choose Edinboro is because they were Division II school, and at that time also NAIA, but I could play 2 sports. I could go out for the basketball team, but also run track as well, whereas at Pitt, it was going to be track full-time.
Let me ask you just a little bit before we move on to university about your high school experience. How were you in academics in high school?
I was a pretty good student academically, so I didn't have a problem. So I never did apply to West Virginia. I applied to University of Pittsburgh, was accepted based on academics, and I can't even remember what my test scores were, but they were good enough to get into some of the schools as well as at University of Pittsburgh.
Well, do you remember the first time you met Coach Watts?
The first time that I met Coach Watts, it was a visit to campus. So I was accompanied by my parents. So I met with him, was impressed by the schedule that they ran, because even though it was a smaller school, they were going to the Florida relays, the Penn relays, the Ohio State relays. They were going down to Tennessee to run, I think it was like the Dogwood relays or the Tom Black Classic. They were going to a lot of these major meets where I could compete against a higher level of competition. That's what got me to go to Edinboro.
So it's out in the country, a lot of snow. Did you know anybody else who was at Edinboro?
Yeah, there was one guy that was playing football at Edinboro that ran track in high school, but wasn't on the track team. I knew him. That was the only person that I knew at the time that was at Edinboro. It was an hour and a half away from Newcastle, where I grew up. And I really like Coach Watts. He was a distance coach, and he was trying to bring more sprinters in at the time, but I really liked his demeanor and felt that was a good place for me.
How did you handle success and failure before you got to university? I know you got blown away, and it sounds like your reaction was, I want to get better. But how did you handle competition and success and failure?
One of the things that I always believed in is, and actually growing up as a kid and playing basketball, like going to summer basketball, playing in leagues and that sort of thing, I always wanted to be an All-American. Okay. I wanted to be an All-American, but I didn't have the talent at a young age to be able to do that. When I got to college and start looking at the times that I had to run, I had two goals in mind, and that was to be an All-American, but also to try to qualify for Olympic trials. Now, where did I get that mindset from? Just being the very best that I could be and putting the work in. Always had a philosophy of plan your work and work your plan. You're not always going to be the first to break the tape, but go back and evaluate every aspect of your race to see where you can then excel in that race the next time you run. That comes from practice, from going back to the drawing board and say, what aspects, what part of my race did I not execute properly? And I just learned that in college, because in college there was a lot of guys better than me, and I aspired to be as good as I possibly could be.
Well, that sounds like a very healthy attitude. Where'd that come from? Parents, coaches, colleagues?
Yeah, you know what? I had a lot of first cousins, but I had one family of first cousins that had 9 kids, 6 boys, 3 girls. And the youngest kid was a year older than I was. So I always looked up to his brothers because they were always excelling in whatever sport they were playing in. And one of my oldest cousins always taught me, train and practice to be the best, but always know when you step out on the track, the field, or the basketball court, there's always going to be somebody better than you. But you always show them the talent you possess. My father in high school, he was an 880-yard runner. He did the high jump. He did multiple events. He used to always show me his medals, right? And they were always like second, third, whatever. And so I always kid him and say, listen, but what did you win, though? He always, how can I say this? He always recommended that I should run the 440 at that time, just because of my long stride. And so he was the one that kind of prompted me to try an event that was longer than the 220. I stopped at the 400 or the 440 because the half mile was a little too long for me.
What about the transition to university then? What was it like in the town of Edinboro and in the community of students there? How did you adjust to college life?
You know what? It did take me a little while to adjust. And here's why. Because as soon as I graduated from high school, I start working construction. So I'm working like every day, 5 days a week. When I got to college, I was a little tired, and it probably took me really about a month to get adjusted. And then after that, it was fine. My older cousins who went to college before me always told me about their experiences as an athlete and things of that nature. And now I'm away from home. I have classes to go to that are not all in the same building, that sort of thing, and just having time management, which I was able to learn early on.
So you arrived there. The cross country team's in season when you start university. There's no indoor track facility there at that point.
No.
Did you get introduced to the team, or were you in basketball? When was your first connection as a team member with that Edinboro team?
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't meet the guys on the track team until our first practice. And I'll tell you about the first practice, because after my parents and I met with Coach Watts, I asked to meet with the basketball coach. So the basketball coach at that time, last name McDonald, but he asked the position I played, and I said I play guard, and he said, we have guards that can touch their elbows on the rim. And I looked at him and I said, Coach, so can I. During that visit, I didn't meet any, I just met the coaches, didn't meet any of the athletes, and it probably really wasn't because that first semester I was playing basketball. So it really wasn't probably until maybe our first practice. And so here's how that went. I go to practice, right, in the afternoon. We're done, 5:30. And we couldn't get to the gym until 11:30 at night. That night I go to basketball practice. And then at 11:30 at night, we're running in the gym. Okay. Wow. Because there's all these other sports, right? We didn't have an indoor facility. And this was probably in January of my freshman year, and which would have been 1975. And that's when I start meeting a lot of the guys on the track team.
You said you liked Coach Watts. How was the personality of the team, and how did you fit in there?
First of all, he was a winning coach. And maybe even at that time, he may have been nominated for one of the coaches for the Olympic team or something of that nature. So I knew that he had success. And that mainly came from middle and long distance running, from cross country. But I felt if he was an expert at those events, then he could certainly help me in the sprints. And my freshman year, I maybe ran a 100-yard dash once or twice, but I was mostly running the 220 and the 440. But he was a young coach at the time. I just really liked his demeanor because he was like cool, calm, collective, that sort of thing. One of the things that he told me was that, listen, we're going to go to these meets where you can run against some of the better guys throughout the country, at least on the East Coast. And I just liked what he said. I liked his demeanor because he was more of a laid back, soft-spoken coach.
Let's talk about your relay teammates. You returned there in running some relays. Who were your teammates, and how did you guys work on that as a team?
Yeah, so in my freshman year, we're down at the Florida relays. I was running the sprint medley, the mile relay, that sort of thing. And Coach Watson recruited a guy out of Erie, Pennsylvania, who was a sprinter. And he ended up pulling a muscle about 2 days before we were supposed to run in the Florida relays. The coach chose me to go to be on the team. And I remember my teammate, who was a football player, Howard Hackley, who is in the Hall of Fame for football at Edinboro. He was running third. I was going to be the anchor guy. And he made this comment to me. He said, oh, shoot, I know we're going to lose now because George, he's a quarter miler. He's not a sprinter, right? I started to develop myself as a sprinter, just working harder. In my freshman year, I anchored our winning conference state 440-yard dash. And what happened when I got the baton on the anchor leg, Bloomsburg was a couple meters in front. Probably within the first 15 meters, I ran past the guy. We ended up winning. And I started to feel that first taste of success at the conference meet. And then in my sophomore year, we brought in two other sprinters, Curtis Pettis, who was from Hopewell High School, and then Steve Davis, who was from Newcastle, from my hometown. And that's when we knew that we had something. So it was really in my sophomore year where we started to get national acclaim.
Yeah, I think that team still holds the record in the PSAC conference, surely the school record.
Yeah. So that, from my understanding, that those records still stand.
Who were the other competitors? Who were your competitors in the other individual races in those first years?
You went to Indiana, and I ran against Ron Steele a few times. The first time that I ran against him, He beat me in the 200. He was a sophomore as a freshman. I had just run in the pin relays the night before, and then we came, I can't remember, it was a triangular meet the next day. So we got on the road early in the morning, went to that triangular meet after running in Philadelphia the day before. And so he had barely beat me. And I didn't run against him again until I think my junior year. I think it was a 200 and then 100 where I did beat him. I'm trying to think of the other competitors. I remember at the time, my sophomore and junior years, I remember East Stroudsburg had some good sprinters back then. I remember they were a school that had a lot of sprinters, and then we had 4 really good sprinters as well. But I can't remember. Other schools may have had 1 or 2, but I do know that back in my sophomore and junior years at Edinboro, that Jim Wooding, he had, I think, won it 4 years in a row when it was all said and done. I can't remember about Ron Steele because I know he was injured somewhat.
Mm-hmm. Anything else to say about Edinboro? Because you were there at the time of the big transition in how Edinboro approached athletics, Title IX funding and everything, and you changed schools. What was it like when that happened to you, and how'd that affect you psychologically, financially, everything, and you had to make that switch?
Yeah, that was really unfortunate situation. In my junior year, I had got 3rd at Division II Nationals in the 200 meter dash, and so became All American. I believe now, if I'm not mistaken, because I had talked to Coach Watts about this about a year ago, in 1977, when all this happened, I got 3rd at Division II Nationals in the 200 meter dash. And I believe that I have been the highest finishing sprinter, maybe even in the history. But talking with Coach Watts about a year ago, he said that he couldn't think of anybody else in the sprints from Edinboro that had placed higher. So I don't know if that's still a fact or not. But getting back to your question, during our track season, Coach Watts came to the team and said, listen, the Student Government Association has come in and said track is a non-income producing sport. So they're cutting our budget. I don't know if this is part of Title IX or whatever the case may be, but they were going to cut our budget. And he says, listen, we are not going to be able to go to the meets and travel like we have done. He says, what I would suggest is you guys transfer. At that point in time, I did something that was very immature. There was classes I stopped going to because I figured, okay, I'm going to start all over academically when I go to another school.
I didn't think of that impact. Yeah, the impact on your academic plan. Yeah.
So here's what happens. Do you remember the name Ronaldo Nehemiah?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. At the time, Maryland had came and offered me 3/4 of a full scholarship. They had offered Eastern Michigan, which had a good 400 or quarter miler coach. In Ypsilanti, Michigan offered me. Penn State showed some interest. I can't remember if they offered me. Kentucky State, which was an all black school, which I had competed against, also had interest, but I was mostly interested in the University of Maryland and having to be able to run with Ronaldo's Nehemiah. But here's what happens. I had a plan that I was going to go to summer school just to get my GPA back up and then sit out a year, but still compete and then run my last year. But my father could not afford the out-of-state tuition for 1 year.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, because I was one of 5 kids and I was the second oldest. And I look back and it was very unfortunate because even at Edinboro, the scholarships that I got, I still was doing work study. I still went out and got loans. But I think at that time, it seemed like going from Edinboro to University of Maryland, out-of-state school, it seemed like the tuition was astronomical at the time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why. I just didn't say I'll get a student loan. But I think for a whole year, my father just said, listen, because you're not going to get that scholarship until your next year, but I can't afford the out-of-state tuition. So what I decided to do to help my family is I said, you know what? I know people at Slippery Rock. Some of my high school teammates from Newcastle are there. So I contacted Bill Lennox at Slippery Rock, met with him, and said, you know what? Even though two schools compete against each other, I know a lot of people at the school on campus, and I'll be close to home because Slippery Rock was only 21 miles from Newcastle. The first semester, when I wasn't competing, I'd go back to Newcastle on the weekends and I'd work in a bar as a bartender and work at a town bar's security guard on the weekends just to make some money. So that's how I ended up at Slippery Rock. So I competed unattached in what would have been a repeat of my junior year. When it came to my senior year early on, they decided to move from Division II to Division III.
That's when your career really exploded, huh? The success was astronomical then.
Yeah, what I brought to Slippery Rock was I brought a mentality that we had at Edinboro, because at Edinboro on the 4x1 relay, and I'll take you back in 1976 in my sophomore year, I got second in the 440 at the Ohio State relays, and we won. We beat Ohio State.
Wow.
We beat Mid-American Conference teams and Big Ten teams, and we won the 440 relay. Then we started to have some sort of swag to us because that made us work harder. We would get up early in the morning before class and run a couple miles around campus in the snow and just would be jogging, working on the ton exchanges, so they were always crisp. But I took that mentality of doing more, starting in the fall, and start working on a base program. And I start getting some of the sprinters there to buy into it. Let's put in all this base work. Let's not wait until November. Let's start in September and let's start meeting. And you had a lot of distance runners that would go out and run distance. And I said, hey, we need to do the same thing. We don't need to run as long as they are, but we need to put in 2 or 3 miles just to get a base. We need to do these other things. We need to run up hills on sprints. We need to do interval training. But these are things we need to do if we want to be able to compete. I knew I could compete on our national because I had done it 2 years prior. But for the other guys, I was trying to bring them along as well with that same mentality that they brought from Edinboro.
I want to ask you a couple things. One about the success at Edinboro. Talked to some of the distance runners, and there was some envy. There was some anger at their success competing as a small school and succeeding at the big level. Did you feel any of that in track when you were out competing some of these bigger schools?
No, I wanted to whip their butt. That's what I wanted to do. And so it was always, because I remember it may have been like Michigan State, but there was one athlete said, who the hell are these guys?
That's exactly
we're
what
the guys that just kicked your butt, right? So we would go to these schools and we would say, you know what? We got to show them who we are and that we can compete at their level.
Then I wanted to go to this role that sounds like you took a leadership role, at least with your relay team. When did that show up for you as a team leader, or maybe just a leader in general? That sounds like that's part of your life.
Yeah, in my sophomore year, when we gained 2 more sprinters, Curtis Pettis, who was a football and track guy, and then Steve Davis, it was a track guy and a sprinter. We knew we had someone in my sophomore year. Howard Hackley was a junior, and then we had Curtis Pettis and also Steve Davis, who were both freshmen. So we were underclassmen. So after we won the Ohio State relays in my sophomore year, we knew we had something. And because I was the anchor guy, I always felt like if we're behind, I got to get us back in the mix. And if we're in front, I got to make sure that no one runs me down to the tape or anything. I just had this mentality. is when I get that baton, we're going to win this race. I remember going down in I think it was my junior year, and we had a triangular meet. It was Edinboro, University of Tennessee, who had won the NCAA championship a few years prior, and then it was Miami, Ohio. And we only came 0.2 of a second in I can't remember if it was 440-yard relay or it was the 400-meter relay, but we only came 0.2 of a second off of them in a meet. At that point in time, we started to build this utmost confidence. And for me as an anchor leg, I just felt, you know what? I think I'm one of the best anchor guys in the country. Now, I knew that I wasn't because we weren't running against all the D1 schools, but I said, you know what? I think I can hold my own against a lot of teams. And I just had that mentality there at Edinboro and brought it to Slippery Rock.
We haven't listed off your accomplishments, but Slippery Rock ended up winning the national championship as a team. You had several events, All American yourself as an individual. What was your thinking then? What would become of you as a runner after university?
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to do is, so in 1976, we had the Olympics, and I wasn't running the fast enough times, but I remember posting the Olympic qualifying standards on my wall or something like in my dorm room. And I was still way off, but that was something that inspired me to continue. So I wasn't able to accomplish it in 76, but I kept telling myself, okay, the next one is 1980. I want to be in a position where I qualify for the Olympic trial. So I have a tryout on the Olympic team. My mindset was always, I got to always do more. I always got to do more. And I remember being at Slippery Rock, I would go to practice. And then at night, a few times a week, I would stop studying, I don't know, about 10:30 at night. 11:30 at night, I would go out and I would run 3 miles at night. Come back, take a shower, go to bed. And here's why I did it. It was peaceful, but I knew my competitors weren't doing that. Okay.
Great story.
Because I'm always looking for that differential advantage, which again has transitioned into the business world.
A couple of people you mentioned were quite affected by the 1980 Olympic boycott. Jim Wooding, Ronaldo Nehemiah, who knows what they could have done if in their prime they had been able to compete in the Olympics. What happened with you and the Olympic trials then for the coming years?
So I graduated in 79, and then 1980 was an Olympic trials. So working my first job out of college, I got married a year out of college, moved from Pennsylvania to Connecticut, and then trying to train around having a full-time job. And so I did that, but I remember coming about 0.2 off of the 200-meter dash qualifying standard. When Jimmy Carter said that the United States Olympic team was going to boycott the Olympics at the time in 1980, I felt like I still had some good years. I felt that I had not run my best. So I kept training through 1984 when I qualified and competed in Olympic trials in 1984.
Did you have any support, any coaching through then?
Yeah. In the summer of 1981, moved to Colorado to take on a job and just start training right away, because now you're at altitude. You got to get used to it coming from sea level. And probably about the first month, it was really tough. But I started to run indoor meets at the University of Colorado. I ended up running, I think it was like the 300-yard dash indoors. And I won the race, and a coach came up to me who is no longer living. His name is Tony Wells, but he had ran a track team, not a track club called Colorado Flyers, but it was all girls. But these girls were the best in the country, and they were all going to major schools, right? Like Illinois, Ohio State, LSU, UCLA, University of Colorado. So a lot of them was going to these major schools. I was one of the first guys and only guys that he took in. After I won that race, he approached me and he said, "Hey man, who are you?" So I told him that I'd been a national champ, that I wanted to train for Olympic trials. So he says, "Listen, I would love the opportunity to train you." So I trained with him 82, 83, 84.
What happened for the 84 trials?
In the 84 trials, I ran a personal best of 20.74 to qualify for Olympic trials. I did that at BYU University in Utah. Ran Olympic trials. Now, a week before Olympic trials, I did catch a stomach virus. And so once I got to Olympic trials, I could not even run the times that I had run earlier. But I made it from the first round into the second round. The third round was the semifinals. In the second round, I had to place in the top 4. I can't remember if I was 5th, 6th, or 7th, but I had to place in the top 4. And I didn't get there, but then I'm running times about 0.4 of a second slower that I ran like a month prior to the Olympic trials. But you know what? It was a great experience at the time. I had a professional sales job. I was training. I was married. I was paying a mortgage, and I was raising my first son. I felt like, you know what? I still accomplished a lot. Even though I didn't do what I wanted to do at Olympic trials, I ran a qualifying standard, got invited, competed there, and continued to compete, I don't know, since I think 87, 88, something of that nature.
Did you see any old teammates at those trials or rivals?
Yeah, I saw Jim Wooding there. He was competing in decathlon. And so I did get a chance to speak with him, but no one else from the Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference. But it was guys from other major schools that I had run against in the past that I'd see, but no one from the conference.
So you had 2 collections of teammates, the Edinboro gang and the Slippery Rock gang. Have you stayed in touch with any of them over the years or managed to reconnect? You've got Hall of Fame honors and the state at the schools. What about your relationships with those teammates?
Yeah, Mark Muggleton and Mark lives in Boulder, Colorado, so we talk at least once a month on the phone. And then we had another teammate that had passed away here, and I can't remember, this had to be within the last 6 or 7 years. And I stay in contact with Steve Davis, Howard Hackley. I hear from every now and then. One time that I was down in Houston getting ready to compete, I get on the elevator and I run into Mark Ladica, who used to run at Edinboro, who's no longer alive now. But that's about it. From Slippery Rock, I still keep in contact with some of the guys there.
What about Coach Watts? When's the last time you talked to him?
I usually talk to Coach Watts about once or twice a year. It was probably about a year ago. I was asking him about if there had been any sprinters that had placed at nationals. And he said, "George, I think when you got third at nationals in the 200 in 1977, you may have been the highest finishing sprinter maybe in the history of the school." That's when we had that conversation, but that was probably about a year ago.
Let's talk back now, reflecting before you got into coaching on your own career. What's the top highlight or top 2 highlights meaningful to you, whether they were accomplishments or for any criteria? What are most memorable highlights for you?
Making All American was certainly a highlight of my career. We were 6th in Division II I can't remember if it was a 440 relay, 400 relay, and going into the finals, we had a second or third fastest time. So we know we're going to get a top 5. But then our leadoff guy in the semifinals pulled a muscle at 80 meters in the semifinals.
Wow.
And we had to run with him in the finals. So we only got 6th. That gave me motivation to continue to work harder, stay away from injury, that thing. But making All-American was one of the biggest accomplishments, and being a national champion as well, even though it was on the Division III level. It's still, that's something no one can ever take away from you.
Yeah.
Being a national champion. Growing up as a young kid, that's one of the things that I wanted to be all my life, was All American. And so that was a very big accomplishment. Then the next biggest accomplishment was qualifying for Olympic trials.
Very cool. Those are great. You've gotten a lot of honors along the way too, and a lot of recognition for this as your career. Before we get into your coaching, what about your academics? What did you study?
I have a BS in business administration with a concentration in marketing.
Now you're in the medical field.
Yes.
At the end, as your career is ramping down competitively, you've got a career, a family, and you did transition into coaching. When did that ever become something that you thought would be for you?
I had 2 young boys that, when they were very young, decided to coach them in basketball and also in track. My oldest son, when he was 10 years old, he had an interest in running. Okay. He would go with me to the track when he may have been 5, 6, 7 years old, because I'd have my videotape and I would videotape my starts and my running form and all that. He would want me to videotape him, right, as well. So he started to have an interest in track when he was 10 years old. At the time, I had just started a new job. I was too busy. Another coach saw him running in an indoor meet at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, where he'd won the first time he'd ever run like a 60-yard dash. He ended up beating an age group state champion. So another guy asked if he could coach my son, and my son that year qualified for Junior Olympics, got 5th in the country, I think in the 100 or 200 that year. And then when he became 11 years old, I decided to start a track club. I had a Junior Olympic track and field club, and I took kids from ages 8 up to 18. And I did that for 7 years. And my youngest son, when he was 9 years old, he was the age group national champion in the 400-meter dash.
Wow. What about coaching distance?
At the time, I had kids that would run the 100 up to the 800, because I only wanted to have coach kids. And then I had a couple guys helping me, right? The biggest in my track club was, I think, 42 kids, because we had a lot of distance runners. But one of the local high school coaches asked if he could bring his kids onto the track club, but he would help coach. He ended up coaching those kids from really the 800. I coached from 100 up to the 400, and the high school coach who brought kids coached all the middle and long distance kids.
You had spectacular success as a coach. How does that compare to your personal success as an individual, and how did your psyche adjust to transferring that and watching success and failure and learning of your kids and the kids you coached?
Yeah, it was all about having a plan, and I was very methodical about putting together a preseason workout program and a season workout program, so that when we got to our age group meets and our Junior Olympic meets and nationals, where the kids were in a position to peak at that point in time. I learned that from my old coach, Tony Wells, who coached me when I was here in Colorado from 82 to 84. And then I still competed after 84, but I was more or less competing on my own because of my work schedule. I may not, instead of being at the track at 4, I may not be there until 7 o'clock at night. But I took that same level of preparedness with the young kids. One of the things that I did was I would have a parent meeting with the kids at the beginning of the year. And I would tell them about my background. I would tell them that I need to know how far and how good your kid wants to be. Because if they want to compete and be one of the best kids in the state or go to nationals to compete against the best, I need to know that, because I would give them additional workouts to do to develop them. And some parents didn't want to do that, and that was fine. But the kids and parents that did, I had them put in extra work. But it was all about being prepared and having a training schedule and making sure that we stayed on track in that training schedule throughout the season, and then making adjustments as needed.
How did you transition down then? We talked as you transitioned down in your own running career. How did you transition out of coaching?
Actually, transitioning out of coaching. So I coached at a high school level for 3 years, and I was a sprint coach at a private Catholic school here in Colorado, where we won the state championship 3 years in a row as a team. But my sprinters either won state or got second or third. Our 4x1 relay team won the state in all 3 years that I coached there. And then they put me into their Coaches Hall of Fame there. For me, transitioning down, I started to transition down after my youngest kid went to college. He went to college. And so then I said, okay, now I can transition away from coaching into what I've always done, which was work a professional sales job. And that part wasn't hard because I had more time, because I was always multitasking. And that's one of the things that I learned to do, is have a lot of things on my plate, but to be very task oriented, but always write down the goals that you want to accomplish. Because in high school and in college, if I wanted to run a certain time, an individual event, I'd put it on a little piece of paper and I'd put it in my track spike. And every step that I took, I could fill a little piece of paper, even though it wasn't uncomfortable. It reminded me that I'm working toward a goal. Those are the things. So transitioning for me was easy, because now that I could spend all my time and attention developing my career, my business career.
What about that drive of competition? Was it equivalent there that you're putting into your work? It's competition, but it's not that adrenaline performance for a burst.
Right. So now it's about the recognition, the self-gratification for making a sale. One of the things that I learned about running and competing is you may not always break the tape first, but you always go back to the drawing board and assess, where did you not execute your plan your work and work your plan. And in the business world, that's always been planning, setting up my goals by saying, if I convert this much business, this is how much money I'm going to make, or say, this is how much money I make. Okay, so what do I have to do? So let's start at the beginning, or let's work backwards, right? So those are things that I always do. And I always felt I'm always marketing myself. I always want to put my best foot forward, but I always wanted to know more than my competitors. And that's what I always call a differential advantage. So that differential advantage in high school and college that I used, while I was running distance at night or putting in more work than my teammates, and I'd be training by myself. And I said, I know the guys that I'm competing against aren't running at 11:30 at night around campus. I just brought that same mindset into the business world.
It's an amazing story. You have accomplished great things, received lots of honors, and obviously now getting to know you, they're well deserved. It's obvious that you are also able to work with lots of people, impact lots of lives. What's next for you?
You know what? I think what's next is that I probably, once I retire, and it's going to be in the next couple of years, and I've already talked to my wife about this, is getting kids that are maybe in third or fourth grade, developing them, putting together a competitive basketball team where I can then take kids from maybe fourth or fifth grade, develop them until they get to high school, that sort of thing. Or even in track, where I just would have more time when I have my own kids that I'm not coaching, but taking kids who not be a babysitter, because some parents will think, you know what, hey, you know what, I'll let George be the babysitter for a couple hours, have them go out for a track, even though they don't have any interest. None of that, because I used to see through that. And when I saw that in the past, I would just tell the parent, listen, I don't think this is the right place for you or your kid. There's other clubs that can give you what you want. But I'll probably coach again, because what I got out of it is developing a kid to run at a national level. That's probably the next thing that I will do.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes out. There might be a third generation of Crunkleton sprinters coming someday too.
Yeah, I don't know when, because none of my sons are married or have kids. But yeah, one day, because my oldest son was the Colorado State champion in the 240-meter dashes. My younger son placed third in 100 and 200 at state, but was on the 4x1 winning relay team for 2 years in a row at state. So yeah, if they have kids, then I can probably train them as well.
It sounds like the family has a giant trophy case. George, we were on the track together in those mid-70s, at least a couple meets. I didn't know you. It's a pleasure to getting to know you. You're a positive guy the whole way through your life. This great story of your planning and working your plan, success, getting through the adversity, the changes that came in the mid-70s, and not really going to your dream school, but making the school you went to a kind of a dream career. It's really nice to talk to you, George.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.